We are discussing this morning Act 250. In particular, there was a working group.
Someone's got, which he's trying to fix.
Led by the Natural Resources
Sounds
Board,
like you find.
and that we have members of that working group. This, just for reference, for anyone who wants to see the document that's the basis of our discussion today, is this document, which is Natural Resources Board Necessary Updates to Act 250, and it is posted on our website. So we have some of the team that helped write that report in with us to talk about it and Act 250 more broadly. So with that, I'd like to go right to first guest, Ms. Hanson.
And Pete Gill's gonna join me.
Absolutely.
We're gonna split the,
Pull a second chair up and
okay, I think that's all right, thank you.
absolutely
Okay,
choose your own adventure at that end of the table.
we split the presentation. That looks a little different on the cover I have. This is what it's in this, yeah. That's right, so here's the wrong one.
Yeah, get the wrong one.
Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I am Sabina Haskell, I'm Chair of the Natural Resources Board, and with me today is Pete Gill, our Executive Director. Thank you for inviting us in to talk about the study, necessary updates to the Act 250 program. You all have a lot more Act 250 knowledge than other folks, but we'll do a brief overview and you'll be like, yeah, I already know this, but.
Never hurts to hear it again.
Okay. And are you in good shape?
I think we're in good shape. Let's see here if I.
I'm writing down a little question for myself for once while we're getting it set up. If we have time to come back and just check in with you about the Homes bill, and the use of jurisdictional opinions to document the exemption.
Yeah, would like to have that conversation today or at another
No, we
point?
we may have our docket already full on this, but I
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure that I shared that with you so that we could come back.
Yeah. You're in good shape? Okay, so.
We're good, yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much again, and we'll jump right in. And we'll start with Act 250 background, and as you all know, it's our landmark state land use law, the land use and development law from 1970. The Natural Resources Board administers the law. We are in what's considered an independent organization within the administration. We're quasi judicial in our proceedings. And Act 250 is a permit system to address the impacts of large developments on the environment and local government services. We like to say there are 10 criteria, but Pete will correct me when we get into that, or there's way more.
Maybe like 10 times 4 each time. Yeah.
Exactly. Its original vision was to embrace compact development and be surrounded by open lands. And here we are 54 years later, and we're having this, we're revisiting that vision, and that's what we want to modernize to make sure that continues. And then we have the current issues that we're all well aware of, that there's a lack of affordable housing. And we also need protections for our working rural lands and our natural resources.
Can I just check now? So the affordable housing is something that I think like draws everyone's support for immediately, intuitively. And maybe we can sort of keep an eye on today, how often we move between affordable housing that is literally affordable as defined by law versus housing of other sorts.
Fair enough. There's not enough housing, period.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if there wasn't enough housing, it would be more affordable. Yeah. And I've been very struck in the last couple of years about the number of businesses and employers who are building workforce housing. Because who goes into business to build housing for their workforce? And so there is an issue.
Sure.
Yeah. So we were charged both from Act 182 and Act 47 to provide legislative studies to you all. And the topics included location-based jurisdiction and development tiers. We're calling them tiers. I'm sure you've heard that the land use mapping folks are using different terminology. The designation program is using its terminology, but we are actually all talking pretty much the same concepts. And I'm hoping by the end of all of our conversations will land on terminology that is the same for all three. But you also asked us to look at staffing levels, and fees, the capability and development plan, and as I just said, to incorporate the designation and future land use mapping studies. We took the approach of bringing in a variety of different folks who are involved in their professional lives pretty much all the time with Act 250 from a variety of different perspectives. Those are, they know what works, what doesn't work, what they'd like to see change, what they like, that kind of thing. So our goal was to provide a report that emphasizes the areas of consensus among our key stakeholder groups.
So in fact, there's transition from the community that builds and constructs. The various stakeholders we're talking about.
We had 16 people on our steering committee that represented staff and commissioners from the NRB, environmental groups, RPCs, planners, economic development and housing,
State agencies.
state age, and sorry, Shelley, was labeling you out. And attorneys and consultants for developers. So it was a wide variety to hear all the different perspectives, because as you know, Act 250 can start the debate pretty much right off the get-go.
And the goal is,
The goal of the report was to talk about all of the topics that we were charged to focus on and discuss them and come to areas of consensus where we had agreement. So and I appreciate you raising this, because our report, it should be taken in whole, it's not à la carte. It's that these recommendations work together as package. And so that was the goal. So does everybody love everything? No.
No.
Yeah.
so you have a package which is designed to do what?
Yeah, I mean, there are a group of different recommendations which Pete will walk us through. Okay, okay. So we took that approach with this steering committee of 16 people who work with Act 250 pretty much professionally a lot. We met dozens and dozens of times from June through the end of the year. And then our steering committee members reached out to their colleagues. So for instance, RPCs, Pete reached out to other RPCs, and we formed focus groups where they met independently and talked about the different recommendations and topics so that we get more input, and then they would bring it, bring it back to the steering committee for further discussion. Just gave us another level of conversation. Most importantly, thanks to the legislature, we were led by a facilitation team that wrote the report and guided the whole facilitation process. And that was Environmental Mediation Center here in Montpelier, Matt Strasberg. And he pulled in a group of other facilitators with him, a team, including former rep Maxine Grad, and Toby Berkman from Consensus Building Institute, who is working with the state of Vermont on a number of agricultural issues and facilitating conversations there. Jack Cortez from University of Maine, land use planning guru, as well as Tom Daniels. I don't, born and bred in Burlington and is down at UPenn land use professor. And I know I'm forgetting somebody like. I'll tell you later. Yeah. And they did an absolutely terrific job and, you know, just really, really kept us on target, kept us on task. We got our report in 2 days early. And this was really great, and they were really great. So just again, to go through the stakeholder groups, there were environmental attorneys, engineers and consultants, planners in municipalities, housing, economic development and environmental justice organizations. You'll be hearing from Jay Green and I believe this morning. Environmental groups, VNRC was our lead environmental group representing others, working lands operators and district coordinators and commissioners, like I said. And this is where I pass the baton in case unless you have questions or.
Thank you, good, thank you.
Keep rolling. Again, Pete Gill, Executive Director for the Natural Resources Board. Thanks for having us here today. I'll go into, like Sabina said, some of the recommendations from the consensus report. Again, it was just really amazing to see that group of people all come together and come up with recommendations, various levels depending on kind of where they could all meet and what those are. So the first is based on jurisdiction. Again, the charge being location-based jurisdiction and how that could play into Act 250. So in doing that, the committee kind of set up a framework of tiers of jurisdiction. And what I'm going to do here is a little unorthodox. I'm just going to slide forward a little bit and just give you this quick overview, just so you kind of have it in mind. I'm a little bit of a visual person. I know some other folks are. It's just kind of nice to see this framework that was set up from the steering committee. So this idea of this is tier 1 area, these planned growth areas, village centers. It's broken into 2 areas, A and B. And you can see kind of the jurisdictional pieces that go with that. And then you got tier 2 and tier 3 areas. So let me slide back again.
And can I just double check? So when we haven't used the term for a while, location-based jurisdiction. But I think of it as really being part of the Act 250 vision from the beginning because of the capability development. Like that fair, or am I telling myself a story when I think of that way? I mean, the capability development plan came right on the heels of it. I know it had like this troubled history with people rejecting it, but my sense was from reading Dean Davis that he felt like they went hand in hand, and he regretted that we didn't quite get that piece taken care of.
Yeah, it's the third leg of the stool, so to speak, yeah. Which brings in the mapping, which we'll talk about a little bit, but did you want to add anything to that?
All I was going to say was just, I mean, I think you're right in terms of linking kind of those two, the concepts, and we'll get into capability development plan at the end, but this just spoiler alert on that is really, it does come down to kind of looking at this location-based jurisdiction and the integration of the mapping, which is future land use mapping study that occurred at the same time this summer. And then the designations and that program, that study that went on this summer, and kind of integrating these. And so again, kind of the Act 250 study is sort of setting out this framework. And then these other pieces will integrate into that.
It's definitely the 3 studies should be considered together. It is a framework that we envision. And then there will be obviously things that will need to be implemented, and that will take several, a year or 2 to, put those steps into place. But it really provides a great framework to move forward from.
And the concept of location-based jurisdiction is kind of summarized in that first bullet there. So just thinking about the characteristics of the area being the trigger for jurisdiction where you are versus currently as you probably well know, just, in terms of whether you have whether the size of the parcel, not so much of where that, is located. There's some location jurisdiction pieces in Act 250 now, so for example, we have the above 2,500 feet. If you're above 2,500 feet, commercial, industrial, residential, you trigger, Act 250 jurisdiction. So that's one example we have, but kind of looking again at that more broadly for, Act 250. Again, the idea was to set up this framework, and have these tiers, set up.
And for some people, when they see the phrase exemptions from Act 50, it invites a vision of no rules, and I think when we use that phrase, I'm always inclined to think about something like we're shifting planning to a different paradigm, not just like we never just say exempt from Act 250, that we say we're using an alternate in. So it's not like you're falling into a void, it's just a different paradigm takes over.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah, and the mapping is gonna be a foundational piece to determining that. And I think there'll be a little more clarity on the next slide in terms of kind of that jurisdictional rule with tier one. And do have it listed here as exempt, but we can get into a little bit more about what that looks like. So for tier one areas, we've got a tier 1A and a tier 1B, as you saw on that slide. The tier 1A is these planned growth areas. These are areas that are gonna have water and sewer infrastructure. They're gonna have a permanent zoning and subdivision regulations that meet certain standards, and they're gonna have municipal planning capacity to develop and administer the regulations effectively. So again, we're kind of setting up the framework, some large view criteria that would need to be met for tier 1A areas, planned growth areas. And then what the steering committee said in those instances, in those particular, and again, mapped areas to be mapped, the jurisdictional rule would be that there's no residential, commercial, or industrial review from Act 250 in those projects. But that, again, looking at those standards, you've got your municipal layer of review there. You've got certain other capacity determinations that have been made in that area.
Can you say a little bit about planned growth areas versus the 5 designated areas? Are they? Because those are, Mr. Greg, Mr. Cochran just sent us last Friday, like a 190-page report on designations. Are they remodeling the designations in a way that's going to be integrated into planned growth areas? Is that an umbrella term for the 5 different designations we currently have?
Their goal is to streamline and simplify the designation process and have 2 to 3 different areas. That process and determination plays into how we view tier 1A, tier 1A and tier 1B and 2, and they'll all work together along with the mapping.
Thank you.
So maybe you'll get into this later, but I'm thinking about how these designations or areas are determined. Thinking about for places that have permanent zoning subdivision regulations that meet certain standards. So presumably some check has happened to say, yes, you have met certain standards. And I assume that is you all that would be stamping that approval to say, yes, you have met the standard. It's not just automatically assumed.
That's true.
And the same question with the planned growth areas. So bold, underlined, is that something that the planned growth areas something that you all determine? Is that worked out between you and the municipalities? How?
And the RPCs.
And the RPCs?
Yeah.
Okay,
There'll be a process with municipalities and the RPCs.
Okay.
on those designations and going for that plant growth area or tier 1A. And then it would come to a state board, we're presuming it will be the NRD, that will have set up a whole, for lack of a better way of putting it, approval process.
Okay.
Okay, yes, you do meet X, Y, and Z,
Mhm.
and then move forward.
Okay,
Yeah. Is that helpful?
this is helpful.
Okay.
Yep, thank you.
And keep that in the back of the mind as we get to tier 3 as well,
Okay.
similar type of process.
So I don't wanna, you can tell me, oh, I'll get to that, I was wondering a little bit about. One of the concerns I always have when we bring the lens down and focus on a smaller area like a planned growth area is. Who's got their eye on what are the impacts for everything that is connected to that planned growth area, so it could be, we've been talking a lot about river corridors, so. Development within floodplain.
Yeah.
That right, that's,
There's,
you need a bigger field of view to see. What's going on in that planned growth area as it might impact something. Literally, upstream, downstream.
the designation study, incorporated a lot of that, about floodplains and where to grow appropriately in that, in their study, so, I can't speak specifically to it, but there's no doubt in my mind that that's all gonna get pulled in to these kinds of, what's going, where,
One other point to that too is the process that we were just talking about with having the RPCs as part of that. Will give kind of that regional view because there are, as you say, broader impacts, and those need to be assessed. And so having, kind of that planning forward mentality and that regional impact or input into that determination of those areas will be important for that very reason.
Yeah, I think of stuff like the development in Killington that led to impacts on Ludlow. There was. Right, so they can be pretty far reaching, right?
You plan growth area in one town that affects
Another,
another,
so Sarah McDonald,
I'm sure we'll learn how that stuff was there.
yeah, I'm getting in. Just putting, I don't want to derail it, I just want to keep sort of putting questions on the table, so Senator McCormick.
I thought perhaps I could give you whole testimony and then ask this question, but actually, it's a question that I think I will have for every element of your presentation, and it is, what problem is this fixing? I'm operating from William F. Buckley defined his conservatism as the rebuttable presumption that all else being equal, tradition deserves the benefit of the doubt. So we start with what we've got, we're gonna throw out evidence of it, replace them with something else. So first, what's the problem that we're fixing? And secondly, how does this do that? Yeah, okay, and that's more or less an open book for every.
That's my question, and when we sit down today, we're looking at some sort of goals for solving a problem that hasn't been put before us. And I would ask the same question Senator McCormick is asking, which is left to their own devices between builders and buyers. What's not working now? What's not working now?
So why don't we leave those in the, do you wanna give a response to that or just come at it and
We-
work your way through?
yeah, we can come at it as we work our way through, but we'll work at it as we come, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I did not
Yeah, I think.
want to interrupt your presentation. Hate being interrupted, so. No, I did, I
Happy
know
to be
you
interrupted.
have laid out how you, but just as you proceed, this is, I think, it's an ongoing, right?
And I would like to evaluate your presentation in the terms of Senator McCormick's question. What is the problem now that you're trying to solve?
do you want me to take just a brief moment and answer that?
Yeah.
Okay, It's a 54-year-old law that has operated pretty much the way it has since the beginning, to your point. It is a tradition, it is part of our DNA, is beloved by people, it defines the way Vermont is, I get all of that. But it is also super, super complicated. And it was, I'm being a little bit snarky when I say this, but it was written on a typewriter. And we don't use typewriters anymore. It needs to be updated for today's world, and that was an unfair thing, but it's stable law, but laws should be able to change with the times too.
When it comes to people who build housing. And those people who buy housing to consume and use as housing, what's the problem that we don't use typewriters anymore?
Touche. Well, have you had, the folks from VHFA in here talking about the cost of, housing?
Yeah,
So
we did last year, extensively.
The housing issues that Vermont faces right now, if we agree on that, have been decades in the making.
I don't know what the housing problem is that we're facing,
There's no place for people to live.
Yep.
Okay,
because buyers
don't have the
don't
money.
buy housing for working folks. And builders don't build housing for working folks. They tend to build housing for people that already have a house or two already. That, it seems to me, that's what we're facing.
Right. Well, I was, just to finish my thought is that the housing, you're absolutely right. The housing problem has been in the making for decades. Act 250 is not the only reason why we have a housing problem, but we're one of the 5 or 6 reasons, and we're willing to be able to come and say if, fees and timing slow it down, and we want growth in our compact centers. Let's enable that. It doesn't mean we're not gonna be protecting other areas, but if we can help get housing built where we want it by not having fees and the timing issues and the appeals issues that come up. But to your point, there are way more other reasons too. But we can only do what we can do.
I think, what does Act 250 have to do with this? Last year. What does water and sewer infrastructure mean for the purpose of the recommendation that will be forthcoming?
Go ahead.
Maybe I can jump in here too. So we started with kind of the vision of Act 250 that's been on the table for 50+ years of the rural countrysides and the vibrant communities.
It's been more reading,
And
research, refinement, but go ahead.
yeah, certainly some of it existed in a very beginnings of Act 250. There's similar language to that vision of Vermont, and that is certainly being eroded in different ways. And I think this the steering committee certainly looked at this and said, how can we support and ensure that areas where we want development, it can happen, and where we want less development, there's less. And this was kind of one of the ways to look at that. On top of that, there's also the idea of, where have laws changed over time? There's been a lot of laws that have occurred through this body that have increased the ability of other permitting entities to take care of issues that initially Act 250 was there. That was a very important role for us to be there. And that role has shifted a little bit, and we want to be able to address that in this approach a little bit too.
What does water and sewer infrastructure mean on that?
That means that it's an area that has, water and sewer infrastructure that could support, growth, so that it's not going in an area where the resources for that type of, infrastructure have not been laid, you know, so that it's,
Does it have to work? Last year, we passed a bill which said if you have water and sewer infrastructure. Then you have a priority to build there, whether or not the water sewer infrastructure actually works.
That's a very good point, and this is, again, this is kind of the broad framework for all of this. And you know, those are decisions that will have to be made in terms of the details on what meets for each particular
How
area.
does it get up there on the board as a recommendation when it hasn't been worked out?
I think Senator McDonald is referring to CSO events. We have water and sewer
Yeah,
infrastructure, we
yeah.
have CSO events.
Yeah,
If we add more housing to a system that's already experiencing CSO events, do we increase the likelihood of CSO events? Maybe yes, maybe I don't know the engineering on that one, but is it tolerable to add to a system that in some ways, some people would regard to as failing? From an engineering point of view, they say, no, this is actually the design. And it's supposed to protect the infrastructure by allowing bypassing the wastewater treatment facility. So that's in the background of what I think, is that fair to say, Senator McDowell?
No, when you listen to the stories of the old lawyers that worked on Act 250, it was because raw sewage was flowing
yeah,
downhill.
yeah,
Your second item up there is in the best tradition of original Act 250.
yeah,
And what does it mean to have water and sewer infrastructure if it doesn't function properly under the proposal? Because last year, we gave it a free ride. If you had a house and you want to cut it in half, and have two houses and increase housing, and you were flushing toilets into streams, it was okay in last year's bill.
So let's,
I'm not in a position to answer that from an engineering, I get what you're
Are
saying.
you gonna do that again on a bigger scale?
so I would suggest we keep going with the presentation. Mr. Coster is here from ANR.
Yeah.
And, well, he was.
You'll be back.
I think once he heard that question. So I appreciate where you're not letting slide.
Blood pressure.
Yeah, definitely appreciate the comment, and the response that I have for that is just that, again, this is the framework for it, and the decision making of whether you know, the capacity limits of those is incorporated in the review of this. Those details are not part of the broad framework that we're looking at. That the steering committee, the level of detail that the steering committee got into in this. And so again, what we're kind of trying to present here is just that overview and what the steering committee reached. And there will be other decisions that have to be made based on.
So I'm Senator McDonald, I flagged on mine, it says CSO question mark.
Yeah.
Okay? So we get the idea,
Yeah,
if it's perfect water and sewer infrastructure. That's one thing, if it's going to be imperfect, then that's another, and how do we sort that one out? Go. So let's keep, so.
I happen to know someone who works with CSOs who might be, if we wanted to dive deeper into that, might be able to answer some questions specifically about CSOs.
You can give me that name and Jude that name, we'll keep it in our, you know, on deck service.
Yeah, appreciate having you guys get the experts in on that particular.
So Senator McDonald, thank you for raising it. I'm not in no way trying to sideline your question, but I want to
I can
hear,
go on.
I want to hear the rest of the story, so we'll come back to that.
My experience has been that once you have a house framed, the next people that show up have to put the clapboards and the ash and the roofing and the windows on the frame that has been built. And if you're building a frame, then you're preempting how it gets built.
Alright, well, I suppose there could be, I've never heard of this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for bringing me.
Okay, well, I've never heard it, honestly, I've never heard a discussion about saying, oh, until there's improvements in the wastewater treatment facility, we're not gonna allow any additional development, so. I'm gonna put that on my to-do list for questions we need to look at, thank you. Let's continue
Move
on,
on, to 2-1B, so it's that second box in our, visual there. So these are village centers with capacity to accommodate growth. They have permanent zoning and subdivision, regulations. They would have sewer, water, and then either sewer infrastructure, or they would have soil conditions to handle, wastewater. They've got regulations, some infrastructure, but they're not to the standards of the, tier 1A. Again, we're talking framework here, what, the details on all those standards, we're looking at, again, trying to set up a framework for that. The jurisdictional rule in these areas, would be, increasing the residential units from 10 to 50 units in those, areas, allowing for, additional housing, and the other jurisdictional rules would remain unchanged. So you have your traditional Act 250 jurisdictional rules in those areas. I assume there's a similar question and you're withholding that, so I'll move on to the next one. I appreciate that.
Permanent zoning rule.
So moving on here then to the tier 2 areas. These are rural areas, small villages and hamlets. All the land that is not in tier 1 or tier 3, so sort of by definition there. The jurisdictional rule in this area will be similar to existing or status quo. With the lots and units, as we currently have them, but there would be the addition of a road rule to enforce, to reduce forest fragmentation in those areas. So the way that was set up by the steering committee was to have a 2,000-foot road rule that would encompass roads as well as driveways, and in those cases, if there was a development proposed for those, then that would trigger Act 250 jurisdiction.
any combination of new roads and driveways. But if there were two pieces of property side by side, each could have a driveway, they were unconnected, they each could have a driveway of 2,000 feet before without triggering. Or 1999. Okay.
Okay, so moving on to tier 3 areas. These are, the purpose of this area is to protect the important natural resources areas. And for, providing the jurisdiction, an automatic jurisdictional threshold for those particular areas. It would be, regardless of the size of that particular development, and the determination, again, this is where we talk about the integration between the mapping process and this framework for Act 250. And making sure that, the science-based information and mapping goes into the determination of those particular areas. Reflecting on the earlier question in terms of how that happens, similar process. Here we're, again, the RPCs with consultation of the municipalities and thinking that there may be some, potential overlap of municipal areas. Would bring that proposal forward and have that have input from the Agency of Natural Resources and others in that process, and then bringing it up to the state board, whoever that entity might be for final approval.
So is this tier 3, I don't know, something akin to a class 1 wetland? Relatively rare, but not to be developed in at all, sort of, I'm trying to understand that, and maybe get into more detail later, but so this is places where we're not developing.
This is an area where there would be automatic jurisdictional triggers, so whatever the development is that is requesting. To go into this area would have to pass all the 10 criteria that exist, and if, you know, it was. Simply a class 1 wetland, that would probably not pass our pass that criteria of Act 250. But there may be an area where there's where the parcel allows for some development. So it doesn't preclude development in these areas, but it triggers Act 250 jurisdiction review automatically in these
And it
areas.
was 2,500 elevation.
Exactly. So we do have development applications for projects above 2,500 that come in, and right, this is similar setup.
All right, as I learn more. It makes me a little nervous, like if we're only bringing actual Act 250 review. To I guess it's knowing what the threshold is to call something an important resource area. Which, you know, said something like a very small fraction of the state. So that means Act 250 applies other than large development to a very small fraction of the state. Okay,
You
so
still,
I wanna learn more.
yeah, no, very good point, and just as a reminder, you still have your tier 2 area, which would be the remaining with similar jurisdictional thresholds for Act 250 currently, in addition to the road rule.
Thank you, Chair Bright. That was my exact question, which is I want to understand a little bit more what an important natural resource area is. And perhaps you outline that more in the report itself. But could you give me an example, or I know you have maps, but and we know where the designated downtowns are, the village centers, but do you have an available map or examples you could give of what an important natural resource area might be? Because you could, depending on who you ask, it could be a very different answer.
Right. And that will be part of the implementation process.
Okay,
And there will be a process that will be formalized, for lack of a better word, of how those are determined with scientific input, the mapping, and there'll also be a public process as well.
would,
That was our intent, excuse me for interrupting, yeah.
no, you're good, that's the, I like that a lot, would an example be, so the first thing that comes to mind though would be a very pristine waterway, or maybe even a travel path for certain animals, is that kind of, okay.
So we touched on this a little bit already in terms of the process. So again, regional planning commissions to recommend the mapping process again, because of the potential for regional coverage of some of these areas and importance more regionally and their expertise in those areas. But there would be consultation with the municipalities, you've got that plural, as there may be some overlap between municipalities, as natural resources, you know, don't abide by the town lines, right? And then having that state level science based input into the determination there. Again, you know, relying on that mapping process and determination process for this. Consistent and robust standards would need to be put into place to make that happen. And then the overlay of all of that would be that the approval again goes to the state review board. And there's an opportunity for public comment and appeals.
And it would be a fresh list, like there wouldn't be any automatic things that are part of this designation, just you know, there's not some already created list. And then you would be building off of it, because there are just some obvious ones that feel like if you'd have to go, the idea of having to go through a process to demarcate, I don't know, like a beautiful waterfall that I have in my district feels like, it seems like it could be, there's a lot of just obvious ones
Yeah.
that come to mind.
Yeah.
And that I feel that this process might I would hate to see some very important landmarks due to being in towns without the staff or volunteer or the impetus of an individual to put forward a location to have it not be marked or noted. I don't know if that,
No, that makes sense to me. I
Okay.
appreciate that comment.
really,
Yeah.
there's a few mountains I can.
Yep. Yep.
So that, I mean, that of course wasn't contemplated, but it's a good point, and certainly there are existing resources, designations or maps or conservation areas, you know, and those are. I don't think that the process would be blind to those, and we want to
Yeah.
incorporate that,
It would be great,
whether it's automatic or not. That level wasn't contemplated.
it would be great to have some overlap with the work we did with water quality, with those high value waters getting really early on, just.
Yeah.
Some overlap with those.
Yeah.
What's the term, it's not what's the terminology for it's perceived, yeah, it's a class 1 waterway, or it's like the. Water.
Oh, class A?
Yeah, well, right, but it's, I'm forgetting the scheme, because there's like one A,
That's right,
Yeah.
one B,
Right.
two, yeah, and we have a
Class
whole
A,
reclassification.
And that's the.
That's
the growing
I
water.
was the true expert on all that, so. But yeah, they're the high class ones. Yeah, it's one hundred.
Yeah, a lot of tiers.
2, 3, but water is retained. So
Yeah.
Doesn't include the fact.
We have a unit that, actually, so you should, I should be around to have, they can apply.
Yeah.
Alright,
Right, they
Yeah.
can go through that process.
Yeah.
This is a second shot for the Black Dinosaur.
So there's a slide you recognize, so the best word to do it earlier, so I won't linger on that, but there it is in graphics one, got the slides too.
Yeah.
So another recommendation that was made of the steering committee was to have a forest fragmentation criterion. So as you all know, you've got the jurisdictional triggers, which determine whether you're in Act 250 or not, and then you also have the criteria that are evaluated once you're in. And the idea here was a concept to have a replacement of 9C forest soils for something that was a little bit more robust in terms of the forest fragmentation protection, requiring site design clustering to the development and limiting the disturbed areas.
Well, it's just a bit, we've been pushing that rock up a hill for a long time. Can't get that far on forest spread. Be good to see how far we can go.
And certainly that's, you know, forest fragmentation is one of the pieces that the overall location-based jurisdiction helps to address as well.
Part of the consensus package.
I think I turn it back over to you here for
Yeah.
recommendations on governance.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as you're proceeding. My question, I mean, what is the problem with this? And how does this fix it? To rephrase that, another way of looking at that. Either talking about actual developments, actual permits that were granted or denied, or hypothetical, looking in the future. Would you describe to me the development that ought to happen that is not happening now because of the way Act 250 is structured, that would happen if the reforms, if the changes happen? What is it that this is going to accomplish, and should it accomplish that? Because I think there's an unspoken assumption here that there are things that ought to have happened that have not happened in this Act 250 solution. And and that I'm sort of guessing what your answer to my question is, which is, what's the problem? The problem is Act 250 stops good things. And that these changes will take care of that problem and allow those good things to happen. And because so far, I'm trying to envision pretty much with any bill we get. When Phil Scott was on this committee, he and I used to talk about Bucky and Iva.
Yeah,
Okay, Bucky and Iva are this is an older Vermont couple. What is this building do to Bucky? What is this building to do?
Sarah Watson, I think you have something you want to chip in.
Well, I can think of, projects that have been stopped by Act 250 that I would have said were good. And so one of them, and I know this one is a little controversial, but I would point at building a parking garage in downtown Montpelier, a place that is already impacted, a service that would have allowed people to carpool more to get cars off the streets. We have more bike lanes. There are so many, so that we have a place where we could have like a bank of EV chargers, a place where that would have allowed the potential for a railroad station to actually come into downtown Montpelier. There were a lot of really good things that could have happened if we had been able to build this parking garage. And that is a project that was stopped by Act 250. So that's just one example off the top of my head, right? And I would also, and since I have the floor for a second, so you've asked the question, what is the problem that we're trying to solve, right? So one problem that I think we're trying to solve is that we are not protecting our wildlife corridors. We are not protecting against forest fragmentation. We are ending up with sprawl in places that we do not want sprawl, and Act 250 is not preventing that. Okay, so that's one thing, but the other issue is that it is preventing development in places where we want it, which is in our compact, already affected downtowns, and places that already have a good checks on what is being built. So if Act 250 is preventing good development in places where we know we want it and allowing it in places where we know we don't want it, that is the problem we're trying to solve.
Those are valid points, and we need to look at those as cases in point.
And
Cases in case
As
point, it's a case in point.
a systematic failure.
Well, again, the first thing I would ask about, I'm not familiar with the garage issue, is watering and stuff. What was the?
Because of bushes. Because of street frontage. Because the issues that I would say, and I think I can say this, other people may not be able to say this, but issues that were not genuine. Right, like it was that
Genuine?
they were not genuine. There was one person in the end who stood in the way of that project, and the reasons, I'm gonna say it, that they brought forth, I think were not real issues.
They would use the system way.
Use the system to prevent the
Which is, I think, kind of the foundational point that Senator Watson is making is we've had individuals who've been able to co-opt process in ways that we could be preventing by modernizing the legislation. I think what is interesting about the discussion today is, and I definitely hear defensiveness from our two senators who are.
Just modernizing.
Yeah,
It's
it's a tough word, I hear you, but
I said update.
update. But I think to the point that is being made, especially by the stakeholder group, and I so appreciate that they've taken the time to come together in a consensus. It's not that we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's that we need to update it, and there are ways that we can actually get back to the value that Act 250 put forward in a real way. And I think that what is so clear to me that you've highlighted a few times is that we have towns and cities that now have planning and zoning that when Act 250 was around, didn't even have like a town clerk basically, you know? So I look at Hartford as the main example, but we have a totally different system than we did when Act 250 came out. So to be able to modernize that would be great. So that was a really clear explanation of the problem, and actually the most diplomatic explanation of the problem I've heard so far. So sometimes people come at Act 250 like it's this boogeyman, and it's not. And that I hear in your voice.
Yeah.
And I don't like that either.
But what we're hearing is that an opinion, what may be right. That in a particular case, the district commission erred, and was that appealed? Did the board err as well? Or the board err?
I would say that they upheld what the
Yeah.
rules were, right? Like they followed the rules. And that I can't blame them, right? Like they followed the process. And in fact, they were in process. And what ended up happening was that it took so much time that the developer withdrew their application because they couldn't take on the risk of an unknown amount of appeals and time.
Developers at that time of hotels throughout Vermont withdrew dozens of hotel applications because it was not a good time economically to build hotels.
Are we talking about like 2019? Is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about some previous time?
No, this last computer here, not the.
So,
Look at the ones that got click drawn in Burlington for nothing to do other than not a good time to build hotels.
so the beauty of this table right now is we have 85 plus 270 people all care deeply about Act 250 and want us to make the best choices, so. Thank you, and let's keep going, because you have the tough job of being the icebreaker.
Yeah.
Make the move first.
Doing great.
It's like public relations.
Yeah.
Thank you for breaking it. Yeah. Creating open water for those who are gonna follow after you, but we need to make the whole trip.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna drop that for onward.
So I'll just, one of the other buckets I've been calling the buckets was NRB operations, which is governance, do we have enough staff? What's, where are our revenues coming from, that type of thing. So we started with, as you all know, there've been lots and lots of conversations about the NRB board. And I can tell you that our consensus before it was unanimous that we need to return to a professional, we should have established a professional board with a full-time chair and either 2 or 4 part-time appointees. Given the costs, there are benefits to both and cons to both, so, but the recommendation is that there should be a professional board. It will be needed to manage the tiers process and, making those decisions about municipalities that can and should be granted exemptions. The board would be able to take a more proactive role in rulemaking, policy directives, operations. And that includes the, oversight of our district offices and all staff. And one of the anecdotal frequent complaints that we hear about Act 250 is that there's not consistency, there's not predictability, it takes too long. Those are the kinds of things that we can sort of start to begin to build into the process that make it more manageable for everybody.
Sure. Can you fill me, I should know this, but I don't, or it's evaporated out of my head. Are you not currently the chair of the board as well as chair of the NRB? What is it? Can you fill in what you're?
My title is Chair of the Natural Resources Board. I have 4 colleagues that are basically like a citizen board. And there's not the appropriate amount of input, they're not as involved, but it was never intended to be that way. I'm not disparaging the board. It's just, it wasn't intended to be that way. And as you all know, Act 250 is a very, very complicated and detailed law that deserves a lot more input. And I'll just say, is on the next slide. No, I'll just say that if you all decide that we should have a professional board, those folks would be selected based on their backgrounds and experience with land use law, with planning, with development, so that they're bringing in some expertise to the process and understand, working knowledge, so to speak.
Being professionalized, helps support that dedication of the board to the, and again, not to disparage the current board, but it's when you're not paid for something on that level, you're not bound to be as dedicated towards that.
We have other jobs.
You have other
What I thought
responsibilities.
is that it's a concept that volunteers shouldn't be in charge of. What a thought. Maybe we should get benefits too, for God's sake.
I'm not going there. But it was unanimous consensus. I just want to say that it was like, yeah. So the less consensus about whether a professional board should hear appeals or not, or whether they should hear majors. I know that there are certain steering committee members who feel that there should be appeals and certain ones that don't. I'm agnostic on that, because what needs to happen first is to get into statute, a new framework, and then take the next couple of years to build the processes that we're talking about with mapping and destinations and et cetera. In terms of staffing, I'll just tell you that we have 28 folks working for the NRB right now. 3 of them are ARPA funded positions that will end at the end of 2025. 2 district coordinators and Pete, our executive director. We believe all 3 should be made permanent. The 2 extra district coordinators have been a godsend. I mean, they're able to, we use the word internally, they're roving, but like if you get more applications in District 5, they can just jump in and lend a hand and do all of that. And they're also doing the majority of the work with ARPA projects, and we could, we could talk about that another time, but we've been doing a lot with ARPA as well. Let's see, and just as part of the other part of the staffing equation is that we need to, and we do, but we need to do more pre-application meetings and, help being the helping hand, the ombudsman that helps the applicant walk through the whole process. Not everybody has the same level of sophistication, and it's, it's a long application and 100-page guidance document, how to get through it. It's all online now, and people want a person to say, hey, did I do this right?
Yeah.
Do I need to think about X or do I need to think about Y? And that's really, really important.
I'll just add there too, it helps with the expediency of the process as well, just to the coordinators are excellent at identifying. This issue is particularly important because of the location the project is where earth extraction is not going to be something you need to focus on in your downtown hotel, whatever it might be. So that's just a really important role that they play, and we want to be able to encourage and support that.
So he just mentioned the consistent, thank you for that, Pete. Fees. Our revenues for the Natural Resources Board are 80% fees and 20% general fund. So for this year, that's 2.77 million in fees and 713,000 in change in general fund. Fees are based on construction costs and they cap out at 165,000. Obviously, if we move to a system where projects and appropriate municipalities are exempt, that's less fees. And so that's something that we need to consider. And so you see the 3rd bullet, need more general fund support, like everybody else, right? And so but all joking aside, the 80-20 split is a difficult one, because
So last time I saw numbers, there was a point in time on the balance sheet where NRB was minus 600 or so. Legislature put in money and probably like plus 600, something like that. But it seemed like within a year you were back to 0. So your burn rate was greater than fees plus general fund.
well, the fees are based on the market and economic times, and if there's not projects being built, we're not getting fees, so to speak. And the split is 80-20 is a big split, and 90% of our costs are personnel. And 10% are operations, our district offices, our printers, our cell phones.
Did we reduce fees or waive fees for priority housing projects? I mean, there have been discussions about waiving fees as an incentive, but it was just a little hard on your side because there goes a revenue stream.
Well, PHPs are exempt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, there's no fee for.
And
We've identified it as important.
may I just say, and we will be back in the next week or two with our annual update of PHPs versus permitted multi-unit. We're working on that now that we've been doing too long, but sorry.
Even if PHP are only 20% affordable, it also begs another question. Okay, Senator Watson.
Thank you. I just think it's a really interesting point because, I mean, I think theoretically, you all ought to be funded from some separate stream because like if, is it, I mean, I'm not saying, you know, that this is the case at all, but it reminds me of like policemen issuing tickets and then those tickets going back to fund the police, right? So it's like there's an incentive for you to permit, right? And so it becomes like this feedback loop, like it could be, right? And so it seems like there's a reason to separate the funding from your funding from the fee structure, but
For a more equitable share.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, but anyways, just speaking theoretically, I'm not making a proposal.
Well, it's always tricky, with agencies where someone promotes a market and then regulates the market.
Yes.
And then you wonder how that works.
Right.
Senator Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's interesting, I have the opposite perspective.
Oh, sure.
Which is that I think that we should have less of the general fund being used to fund the permitting process that folks who are gonna make money eventually off the property. Are putting forward to make sure they follow regulations, but that kind of brings me to my question about the cap, which is. What is the percentage, I mean, do you have projects that are much larger than the cap? Would it, like, if you didn't have the cap, you would be getting a much larger fee? Because the large developments that are ultimately going to be the biggest money makers, the wealthiest developers. Having a cap actually feels like it has the opposite effect, where then the lower cost developments or the smaller developments are actually carrying a larger burden. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to the cap and if you feel that it is an equitable cap.
The cap is in statute and it's based on construction costs, like I said. I have that back at the office. We looked at how many projects would have gone over the 165, so I will
I would love to.
provide that for you, and I can't remember what it is right now.
There's a giant ski resort that caps out at 165 and the cost of that whole process is much greater. And they should have had a larger fee. Up to know that versus us taking it from the general fund.
Yeah.
But so that would be great information. But I also understand,
It's not that many, I was surprised, I would say like a dozen or less, but I might be wrong, so I wanna.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just probably a few outlined giant projects that, okay, thank you.
Do you wanna talk about rule 19?
Sure. Yeah, okay, so we do have on this slide here, reducing the redundancy, and the idea of changing Rule 19, which provides these rebuttable presumptions currently, and making them dispositive for the purpose of Act 50 review. So stepping back there just for a moment, how rebuttable presumptions work is if there is a permit that's listed in Rule 19 for certification, there's a couple different things that mean permit in that context, but it would provide a rebuttable presumption, meaning that you have your permit, it covers those elements or that part of the criteria, or in some case, the whole criteria. Because you have that other permit, you use it, but somebody can come in and say, oh, I want to rebut that, I've got other evidence, and you should consider that. The vast majority of projects, the way that it works now is that somebody obtains that permit and it is essentially a checkbox. We've got that permit, it covers that aspect of the criteria, works pretty well in that way. But there are some where it could come up and be rebutted by someone. And this would just allow it to be dispositive, meaning that it covers that area. We've updated our regulations and laws that cover various aspects, right? And this is kind of that concept of we don't need to do that twice, we don't need to have that reviewed twice, it would be covered under the, for example, agency of natural resources permit.
Is there no requirement to, is there no requirement to challenge the permit itself as opposed to challenge the easement criterion within Act 250 for a permit that we generally treat as creating a rebuttable presumption? Like, why is the appeal happen on the second use of the permit as opposed to on its initial issuance?
Yeah, well, I think you're honing in on a point that is why I think this is, you know, probably why it was one of the recommendations of the steering committee is to not have those two different potential bites, or if you missed one, hey, now you have another chance to do it in a, as you say, kind of a secondary process rather than in the initial process.
And because I thought that we were trending towards not using permits, like state issued permits, as coming with a rebuttable presumption of Act 250 compliance, so that the original permit process was robust enough that then Act 250 says we're counting on that, and you have that rebuttable presumption. So you're saying, even though we let it carry over, someone can appeal, in essence, the permit in the Act 250 framework as opposed to in the original issuance of the permit.
Exactly.
Okay.
With review, with rebuttable presumption, who bears the burden of? Yeah,
So how does that work? So the applicant has the initial burden to show that they, yeah, have a permit, and it's, you know, valid permit issued. And then I think the opposition has the burden to show that it doesn't meet, and that's when it shifts the
that's my understanding as well.
presumption. Yeah,
Because the presumption means that all else being equal, the permitter got it right.
exactly.
If someone says otherwise, they got to prove otherwise.
They've got to sort of, right?
Yeah, okay, specifically, what does what permits does Rule 19?
I have a book that has all of them listed, but I don't have it in my head of every single one, but there's quite a list. I will admit here on the record, there's probably others that we need to incorporate into that list and as part of our rulemaking efforts going forward.
I mean, just at the risk of being an old man with his war stories, I chaired the District 3 Commission. I remember we got into a lot of flack at chamber breakfasts and
I did.
letters to the editor. No, because there was a project where the Regional Planning Commission and the town had both said that this project is compatible with the town plan and with the regional plan. And objectors came up and then they gave what we found to be very convincing evidence that it really wasn't. If you looked at the plan, you read the simple black letter law in the plan, the black letter in the plan. This is not that. And we said it's not in compliance. But the thing is, if the rebutters were successful in rebutting. Now, the assumption here is that anytime someone objects to a permit or go, that something has gone wrong. I think something went wrong every time I drive by this one. It's like 35 years ago. Every time I drive by this, well, my life hasn't been completely wasted.
This is on the mill, is
The what?
it the mill development?
No, it was what they referred to as a camp. It was an RV facility right on the lake.
So can we try to wrap in the next?
The town plan, not part of the, I get your point,
Okay.
points, they're not part of this, just for everybody else.
In general,
Yeah.
I mean, all these things that have gone wrong with Act 250, where I'm not sure that something went wrong. I think maybe the horror stories that we get are examples of Act 250 doing exactly what it was designed to do.
Yes, I think that that's the point, is maybe we actually don't love the design of it as it stands right now.
We don't know the outcomes.
Yeah.
But I mean, the assumption that the outcome was it was a bad outcome.
Oh, no,
You know?
I think it's just a changing, it's not a bad outcome, it's just a changing goal.
What's changed?
All right, so we're gonna.
In goal.
To read this out, so.
People
This
have
is, this is,
cabinet planning.
it's.
Jennifer Claire White, please, we need to finish the presentation, we have other witnesses. And we'll have plenty of time for.
I hear there may be philosophical discussion that needs to happen.
Yeah.
We'll move on to.
One last, the idea that things. The idea, the idea I'm talking about has been there for all,
Okay.
it's always been.
It's unchanged.
All right, are you, never mind, we're gonna keep going.
Nobody's falling asleep here.
You're
It's
doing
good.
capability.
Yeah, so, second to last recommendation, that we'll highlight here for the, committee is, on the recommendation on capability and development plan. I gave you a little teaser earlier. I mean, it comes down that we need this mapping, approach. You can see on the screen there, some of the old maps from the capability and development maps of Addison County there from 1972. I'm not sure if that was typewriter or not, but it's pretty clear that. On there, but you know, the overall idea that these need to be, these need to be done, updated, done with GIS, you know, modern day technology, and through a process like we discussed before, you know, where we have municipalities, and regional planning commissions, and state agencies, putting input into the process and having, you know, final, adopting authority, of those, through the, maybe the natural resources or whatever the entity can be.
And I'll just add, I hope I'm not stealing any of Peter's thunder, but this is a bottoms up approach, that everybody from the local community through the region gets, you know, is mapping rather than the state coming down, which is gonna be really significant, I think. Yes.
They know their areas,
Yeah.
but you've got, again, kind of that regional planning view of, the broader impacts as well, to be part of that discussion and process.
And the mapping happens, we make changes to the Act 250 process prior to having the mapping completed, correct? And did I misread the proposal? That we start making changes like the tiering and the permitting happens prior to completing the mapping.
I would say they have to go together. The mapping is pretty much the base, because we won't know what our designated places are, our planned growth areas that we want. Or where we want to be able to protect more vigilantly, that type of thing.
Great, yeah, I mean, that was my concern was if we're gonna do something new and it requires maps, if we proceed prior to finishing the maps, then what are we engaging in?
There was a timeline that we just proposed or recommended for. That the legislature would approve this framework this year, and then we would have 2 years to implement these things, and they would all line up, coordinate, and we originally picked so that they would take over once the Home Act exemptions ended.
Smart.
So that it would just be, linear, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely not something that's, on the end of the session or something like that. I mean, there's a lot of implementation, and that's again why we've been talking about the framework, getting that set up so that there's processes and can start to play out as before it's completely implemented.
You say yes for the framework, we go work and make it happen.
So last slide for us here, recommendation, this was a last recommendation, of the steering committee. There was a lot of discussion about working lands and, the natural areas, and one fairly discrete, decision that was made, or recommendation, I should say, that was made was, to reduce the agricultural soil mitigation ratio for forest processing enterprises to, 1-to-1. So those mitigation ratios change. You might recognize the 1-to-1, that's one that they use for industrial parks as well. currently. So anyways, leave it there and
What's the ratio now?
so there's 2 to 1 and 3 to 1, depending on, or 1 to 3, I should say it the right way, I always mix it up. It's 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 or some variation in between there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Looks like Addison County had.
Might be.
Yeah, what's the map?
Recognize.
Recorded, he's so.
Animal company.
Yeah,
That's next night.
You'll be in the sheet. Like, are they?
Well, thank you again for having us.
Yes,
thank you.
Happy to be back at another time as you're digging in.
Thanks for helping us walk through well, one, thanks for organizing and leading the process that brought forward this thoroughly considered proposal and also playing the ice breaking role. We will take